So when an agency stresses loyalty between the employer and the employee, you really have to ask, what exactly are you asking? Are you asking for basic human decency? Hey everyone, welcome to RSI, Rapid Sequence Information. I am Chris, and today we're going to talk about the top 5 red flags that you should know before you join any EMS agency. Obviously, we all started somewhere, right? We're all out there at one point looking for a job with an EMS agency with our shiny new EMT or paramedic license, and we just want to get out there and help people. Or maybe we're moving from one part of the country to another and we need to kind of scope out the local agencies. There are 5 red flags that we believe should help steer you away from the wrong ones. Now, to make it on this list, the red flag has to be able to be identified before you accept that job offer, but not necessarily before you interview. Every one of these red flags comes with a caveat. Just because an agency has one of these red flags doesn't mean it's a no-go. So each one of the red flags along the way is going to have a best case scenario where maybe it's not a big deal. Also, we're going to list them in order from meh to holy shit. And yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So number 5 on the red flag list of red flags you should be aware of before you sign on with any EMS agency is overuse of the word loyalty. Now, the reason this one is so low on the list is because it's actually just more of a pet peeve of mine. Here's the thing about the word loyalty. In most cases, it's harmless. It's a beautiful slogan on the side of an ambulance or fire truck or police car, whatever you're going for. And it may mean something nice like it's loyalty of the agency to the city it serves, and that can mean a lot to the people there. Where it may become a problem, though, is when a company stresses loyalty between the employee and employer. Even in that scenario, it's usually just a nice buzzword to make people feel good, but it can have some problems. Here's my take on the word loyalty. Loyalty is a fluff word. Now, I'm not saying being disloyal is okay. It's not. When it comes to the employee-employer relationship, loyalty is a two-way street. Your employer has to be loyal to the employee by making sure that working conditions are safe and good, and that pay and benefits make sense for the work being done. Then yeah, it's generally expected that the employee should give that loyalty back to the employer, provided this is a career path they want to keep going down. And that really is just basic human decency. So when an agency stresses loyalty between the employer and the employee, you really have to ask, what exactly are you asking? Are you asking for basic human decency? Because I'll tell you this, if you treat your employees well and they still treat you like crap, then asking them to be loyal probably wasn't going to do the trick. They were always going to be that way. What usually ends up happening is employers aren't asking for true loyalty. What they're actually asking for is patience. But oftentimes when these agencies ask for patience, it's usually patience for unfulfilled promises that really never come to be. And that can be bad. Generally speaking, the word loyalty is fine. You can ignore it. It's a fluff word, but be wary of those agencies that really stress the word loyalty. So how is that something that becomes apparent before you accept that job offer? Well, a lot of that is going to come down from knowledge of the agency beforehand. And I admit that can be really hard to get, especially if you're coming from out of the area. But if it's an area where you are familiar and you know some of the people, it's a good question to ask. What kind of people get promoted within the agency? Those that are loyal or those that are talented? Sometimes that's both. One way to find out about a given agency is to ask questions on online forums. I'm very hesitant to recommend getting all your information about an agency from Facebook or any sort of online group. For example, if you're looking in the state of Oregon, there's Oregon Paramedics on Facebook. But if you don't have anything else, that may be your only opportunity to find out. So number 4 on the list might surprise some of you. Number 4 on the list is actually going to be poor compensation. I know that seems like it should be a bigger red flag than it is, but trust me when I tell you, a lot of the EMS personnel that I know end up leaving places to take a pay cut elsewhere. Oftentimes it's more about the work done and how the agency treats their employees in other ways than it really is about the compensation. A good example of this is flight nurses. Most flight programs do a flight paramedic and flight nurse combo, and in a lot of these programs, flight nurses actually take pay cuts to leave the hospital and go to these programs. But The flight program offers things that the hospitals just can't. A lot of nurses feel they have a lot more autonomy when they're in the flight program. The call volume is typically less, though the hours are a little bit longer in terms of things like 24-hour shifts, but the work is so much more exciting for some people that they would rather take the pay cut and work at a flight agency than continue to make the amount of money they were in a hospital environment. The work environment can really matter a lot more than compensation. That's why it's so low on the list. However, it can become a red flag. And when it becomes a red flag is usually when you're looking at two agencies in the same area doing the same work, and one has substantially more pay than the other or better benefits. So where I would say this red flag really plays a role is gonna depend on you. When you're looking at an agency and you're comparing it to another agency, if all our things are equal, the only difference is pay, then the pay might be a red flag for you to pick one or the other. Now, pay and compensation is usually pretty easy to find out prior to accepting a job offer, as that's usually in the job offer you have to accept, what your pay and compensation will be. So number 3, and now this is the part of the list where the it could be okay side really starts to shrink down. The third item on this list is going to be turnover rate. Turnover rate is exactly what it sounds like, and that is, how often do employees leave this place? How many employees stay for the long haul? That could be a really good indicator of how people are treated when they work there. Let's go back to those two agencies we were comparing before, one with higher pay and one with lower pay that essentially do the same job. What could be a big red flag for the place with higher pay that may make it seem like a better agency is if people are constantly leaving it for jobs that pay lower, but essentially do the same work. That's a strong indicator that something could be going on in that agency that's causing people to leave. Now, there are situations where a high turnover rate may not be a problem. For example, a lot of agencies do primarily interfacility transports, and a lot of paramedics are not looking for that kind of work long term. It's a good foot in the door job. Also, smaller fire departments where they expect people to gain experience with them and then leave for larger, more higher paying jobs. Those are places where a higher turnover rate may not actually be an issue or any indicator of how the place treats their employees. In fact, agencies that have these kind of tasks where high turnover rate is expected have an opportunity to embrace that and may actually be a great agency to work for. See, if you are one of these agencies, embrace your turnover rate. It's okay. What these agencies should do is embrace their high turnover rates and help people along in their journey. Because here's the thing, if you're not providing the kind of work or you're not providing the kind of pay that your employees ultimately want, and you don't have a way of providing that, they're going to leave anyway. But if you're the kind of agency that embraces the fact that they're going to leave and helps employees along their journey, that's going to do two things for you. One, it's going to get better work out of the employee because they want to impress you so you can help them along their journey. And two, it's going to really help you fill that vacancy quickly when they leave. If you have a bad reputation and you're not embracing that your high turnover rate is actually okay for your field of business, it's going to be really hard to fill those vacancies when they open up. Now, finding out a turnover rate prior to accepting a job offer can actually be a really difficult thing. A difficult thing to ask for in the job interview and may kind of signal that you're not quite sold. Things like turnover is going to be information that you're generally going to have to get by speaking with people who work in that area. Now, in rare circumstances, there are places where agencies, particularly private ambulance companies, are actually required to report turnover rates to the municipalities that they work in. However, that doesn't mean you necessarily have a right to that information. So approaching the municipality they work in is going to be hit or miss, and you may get nothing at all. Number 2 is a poor onboarding process. So the onboarding process is really, really important, and it often shows how much a company is willing to invest in an employee. And if a company is willing to invest in a brand new employee at the start, that's typically something that carries throughout the rest of the company. So what does this typically look like? Well, a lot of onboarding processes are usually divided into 3 phases. You have a classroom phase, a third rider or non-crucial role phase, and then you have a phase where you are a crucial member of the team, but you're still receiving evaluations. And the length of these phases really kind of show how much a company is willing to invest in the employee. So for example, those first 2 phases where you're in a classroom or you're a third rider and what's normally a two-person crew, Those are phases that essentially just cost the company money. You're not filling a spot in the schedule and you're not generating any revenue for them. They are just paying you to learn. Now, the caveat to this is that not every training program really needs to have a super long phase 1 and phase 2. It really depends on where you're working. In a system where there's a lot of other responders, you may be put into a more relied upon position than you otherwise would. Mistakes you make can often be caught by these other providers. In other words, you're not alone out there. In systems where you may be the only ALS provider or one of two, those are systems that are going to benefit more from having a longer phase 1 or phase 2. What you really need to be wary of are systems that put you in a position to fail right off the bat. That can ruin your career right off the start. Being put in a position where you are set up to fail by making mistakes that should have been caught because, hey, you're new and you're human can not only have a huge psychological impact on you and your ability to want to keep doing the job, but it can also have an impact legally on you and your ability to keep practicing legally. Going into a system that's going to put you at risk both personally and legally and ultimately financially are systems you need to watch out for. So how do you find that out before you get into an agency? That's actually a great question to ask at an interview. And one of the things we love to see is candidates who are preparing themselves to work for our agency. And a great way to prepare yourself is to ask about the onboarding process. So showing interest in the onboarding and training process can show that you are indeed really prepared to work for this agency, and it will give you an idea of exactly what to expect and what this agency puts into their new trainees before you accept an offer. Big bad number 1. What I would say is the biggest red flag. And the caveat to this one is a small, teeny, weeny caveat. The number 1 red flag that says you should not get on board with an agency is poor interagency relationships. Now, that's a really long way of basically saying no one likes them. Now, that's not to say just because one agency doesn't like another agency that you shouldn't join. There's always agency rivalries. But when you have an agency that has a bad reputation amongst the hospitals they deliver patients to, the agencies they work on patients with, and even amongst their own employees, that really says something. The caveat to that also is a really small one at that, in the sense that usually agencies that get to a point where they are universally hated may be on the verge of undergoing some major changes that could be turning them into a good agency. The best way to find this out is going to be to talk to current employees in that agency, not disgruntled former employees. It very well could be that the agency is making some major, real changes that is going to make it a better place to work that provides better care and improve its reputation. And improving a bad reputation takes a long time. People don't forget bad experiences easily. Even in that scenario, you're taking a huge risk. You don't know how long these changes are going to last. You don't know if these changes are really making that big of a difference. And for all we know, this could just be an agency that wants loyalty while they make promises that never come true. So with that, that's the top 5 red flags that you should know before joining any agency. Feel free to rip us apart in the comments. Also check out our social media. And of course, listen to the EMS 2020 podcast where me and my co-host Spencer do a new case review every other week. New episodes are on Wednesday. Thanks for checking us out. And yeah, of course, hit the like and subscribe buttons and turn the bell icon on and all that good stuff that everyone always asks you to do anyway. So bye-bye.